I'm happy to be here to have the opportunity to lead us in a panel discussion. For those of you who don't know, Ideas to Go, we're an innovation consulting firm. We work with Fortune 500 companies to help them think more innovatively, act more innovatively, and come up with breakthrough ideas. So I'm going to bring our panelists up one by one. First, we have Laurence Boucher. She's the Global Vice President of Consumer and Market Insights at the Mars Wrigley Company. And Laurence was actually once a veterinarian, which is really interesting. And she also holds a PhD. But she took a really interesting path from being a veterinarian and then moving into an R&D role with Mars Pet Care. And now she has transitioned into roles such as sales and communications, and now into insights. And she is hailing from Chicago. Please welcome Laurence Boucher. I'm really interested in what a dog insight is from the dog's perspective, but we're probably not going to talk about that here. So why don't you have a seat? Thank you. Next up, our Executive VP of Consumer and Market Insights globally at Unilever. And he is seen internally as the chief provocateur. Prior to joining Unilever, Stan was in strategy and insights at Coca-Cola Company. He served on boards, spoken at conferences, including here, where I actually interviewed him. And he's co-authored a book, AI for Marketing and Product Innovation. And he hails from the UK. Please welcome back Stan Stanunathan.
Thank you.
Next up, the leader of the Global Insights Capability and Center of Excellence at PepsiCo, Eva Witkowska. Eva has been with Pepsi since 2000. Prior to Pepsi, she held positions at Millward Brown and AGB Italia, which is now part of Nielsen. She has a master's in applied psychology, and her goal in her role has been to transition the Insights associates into indispensable business partners, which is actually right on topic. And then I will say, please welcome, hailing from New York, Eva Witkowska. So I just want to also tell you all that you don't listen to this, but it's taking so much self-control for me to not just hijack this group and pitch them on stuff. I mean, they're amazing. Okay, so here we are. And we have, the topic of this is around elevating the insights function to be a true partner to the business. And I'd like to just start with a question. What has happened in the industry that's really led to the need for a change in this insights function? Who'd like to start?
Happy to do that.
Great.
Yep. I think the whole competitive landscape is going through a very radical transformation. The speed at which change is happening around us is changing exponentially. The number of competitors, as Will said early in the morning, you don't even know who your competitor is and where they are coming from. So that's another fundamental change that is happening. And when you put those two variables in play, then the demand from the business is, can you do things faster and cheaper and better? Yeah? And that is actually the fundamental reason why the insights industry is changing quite dramatically. Gone are the days when you could brief and wait for 8 weeks to get some results, because by which time there's a good probability that the brand manager who briefed you has moved on to a different job, or he or she has forgotten what they briefed. So there is a huge frenetic activity that is going on. And if you don't feed that beast in a meaningful and purposeful way, we don't exist as a function. And therefore, we have to reinvent ourselves quite dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I'm happy to add. So another thing which changed very much is that we can learn so much without even asking questions. Mm-hmm. So before we were, having lots of questionnaires. Now, when whoever has a business question, there is so much traces that people leave in the digital space that we can instantly have an answers without even going into the primary research. So that changed a lot. And then I totally agree, the need for instant answer is changing everything we do. I think that there is one more fundamental change, which is increasing lack of trust into the claim answers. So again, everything we can do to understand how people behave and draw conclusions from their behaviors, do a lot of A/B testing rather than, again, asking them directly and listen to the answers. I think that's also fundamentally changing how we run research. So those three are kind of my top.
Great, great. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say I think all of this happens in the context of the world changing probably faster than ever. I'm sure every generation says that, but I actually do think it's true. And I think Will gave us a really good picture of that this morning when he talked about the 14-year-old and how they experience life and how they live their lives. And I think the fact that how consumers, and I don't even like to use the word consumer anymore because the boundaries are blurring and we need to look at people holistically to really understand their motivations, their needs. And I think given that that is changing so much, I think the role of insights is changing, but also remains very true, is that we are the group of people in an organization who help our organizations to make sense of that change and to remain relevant in that ever-changing world.
Right. You mentioned something, Stan, about faster, cheaper, better, and I just feel like there used to be the saying, you can have good, you can have fast, and you can have cheap. Pick two. So how do you manage that? And
yeah, I think that's a quintessential dilemma. But I think there's no option but to have all three. So we have an internal mantra which basically says, our goal is to actually deliver twice the impact in half the time and half the cost. And the sad part of it is that when you deliver it in half the time and half the cost, you have to deliver it further at further half the cost and further half the time. So it's an ongoing journey. But it is easier said than done. So what we have done over the last 4 years is to actually consciously scout for innovative approaches. So, the process that we have internally in place is we have spoken to over 3,000 startups. Many of them don't even know that they have a product that could be applied to the insights industry. So we have spoken to 3,000 plus startups, and we have scaled 250 tech-enabled tools on a global basis. And in fact, they right now account for roughly 40% of our total research spend. And this is actually quite a painful exercise to go through because you have to do your day job and you have to also do this in the evening. But having gone through it over the last 3 years or so, it has been an incredibly rewarding experience. So very often people internally will come and ask us, you guys are not insights function anymore. Are you playing in marketing tech? Because some of the supplies we bring to the table are not necessarily, the lines are getting blurred. That's the reality. You don't know where marketing ends and where insight starts and where sales begin. All those things are all completely getting blurred. So if I have to make a prediction, I think in 3 years' time from now, I don't think this function will be remotely resembling the way it resembles today. It has to go through a radical transformation. And these startups have actually taught us that you can't say that my job is done when I deliver insights. You have to you have to really go beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, interestingly, so half a year ago, we went through the change of the CEO, and the new CEO gathered the group of 50 senior people in the organization, and they came with a mission and ambition for PepsiCo, and what they come up with is not very far away from what you said. It's faster, stronger, and better. And again, if you stop at this level, everybody can say the same, but it's interesting what they mean by faster, stronger, and better. And interestingly, faster is all about human centricity. It's all about being relevant, and then once you know what is relevant, invest in those growth areas. So we are responsible as a function for making company grow faster, which is a very ambitious goal. And then stronger is all about the culture and capabilities. Again, we see pockets of investments into the media analytics, into the human centricity, into digitalization of all our tools, which didn't happen before. So there is really not only claimed focus on the insights function, but the investments come together with that. And better is all about the sustainability and making sure that what we do is good for a planet and the people. So it's great to see that we as a function are really elevated to the top priorities of a company, which is a great feeling. It is a great responsibility as well, but we take it with pride and pleasure.
Yeah. So what do you, as leaders, what are you doing with your team or within the organization to really elevate the insights function?
Well, a number of things, of course, and I would say it starts with talent. I think we're looking at talent very differently in terms of really having still that mix between technical capabilities and leadership capabilities, but I think as technical capabilities become more technical, and I think the influence at leadership level becomes also more important and more challenging because our leadership is bombarded with so many messages and we need to cut through. I think that search for great talent doesn't just remain as important, it becomes even more important. And I think these people become even harder to find, I would say. And the war on talent is a big challenge and a big opportunity. And I think some of the things that we are doing remain the same. They just happen in a slightly different context, right? We still want to bring foresight. We want to really influence decision-making, drive growth, drive the right decisions for growth. It's just that in a more complex world, in a fast-changing world, I think that becomes just more, it has to happen faster, to your point, it has to happen with even more impact. So we're just adapting to make sure we still have that seat at the table and we drive that impact into the organization.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, do you feel like you ever have any resistance from people who were in maybe an older regime of how things were done before?
I wouldn't say we have resistance. I think one of the things we had to be careful is to adapt fast, to also be seen, to embrace new technologies, embrace new ways of doing things. So, at some point a little while ago, there was a little bit of a competition between the insights function and the IT function that had developed to become really, very tech savvy, bringing things like artificial intelligence, machine learning to the table. And we took a step back and now we're collaborating and that makes us stronger. But it was that, what is our place? We didn't want to be, of course, seen to be the guys who just do the old stuff as we've always done. We had to reinvent ourselves, to pick your point, and bring that to the table. And once we did that, I wouldn't say there was resistance. There was a really open invitation.
Great. And Eva, what about you in terms of what you're doing to really elevate the insights function?
So we picked up 9 capabilities area that we selectively invest into. We have champions of each of those capability area. We have very strong connection with all the regions and markets to make sure that that knowledge transfers. So we equip all the associates with the right set of tools. We try to simplify them. We try to make sure that every tool is exactly, faster, cheaper, and more predictive. As they are, we also spend quite a lot of time on the leadership skills. So it's not only about the technical skills, it's also about how we show up in the organization. And with a changing role and the changing expectations, it's really very important. So we approach it in the way that we identified the tensions that people on the different levels of, in the insights function that they face in every day. And the tensions are like, negotiate time for thinking, or saying no to primary research, or making sure that we spend time knowing our stakeholders well enough so we know how, what are their goals and how we can help them achieve their goals. So we have 10 of those, and then we not only mentor each other and help each other to go through those tensions, but really, first of all, trying to identify who is struggling with what and how we can help them go through those tensions and make a bigger impact in the organization. So I think it's super important that we are balancing the technical skills with the leadership skills. I think as a function, we tended to be, somewhere in the background and behind the scenes. We are not as courageous as some other colleagues from marketing, sales, neither GM. So we are pushing the insights associates to be much more outspoken.
Yeah, and sort of, being not afraid to challenge the system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the way we went about it is a little bit differently. What we said was, you need to have a clearly articulated vision for the function. And we articulated a vision for the function as inspire and provoke to enable transformational action. Yeah? And every word is carefully chosen. You've got to be inspirational when you turn up. And, you don't want to be subservient, but you should be provocative. But at the same time, you're not driving action, but you're enabling people to take action. Mm-hmm. And the action cannot be any action, it has to be transformational action. So that's the vision that we had. Now then everything flows from that. Everything flows from that. How you turn up in a meeting, what you say, what you do, how you tell your stories. Then once you articulate that vision, then you got to train your people. And I think, we start off with this general philosophy that, okay, there is pace of change will never be this slow ever again. It's going to accelerate. And the other thing is change is the only thing constant. So, we got to accept that if the pace of change is not going to be slow, this slow ever again, and change is constant, then we need to first change the cultural mindset of the organization rather than, skills and capabilities. Because we are fortunate to have some really, really bright people in the team. It is easy to turn around and say that, I've got a bunch of new needs that I have, so let me throw the old out and get the new in. It's a tempting thing to do, but then that's also a lazy way of doing things. So we actually spent an enormous amount of time retraining. But at the same time, you also have to bring in some fresh perspective. So if I look at my own function, over a third of the function today people did not exist in the function 6 years ago. These are people who brought in absolutely new skills. We created this new internal capability called the People Data Center, which is a capability that we are genuinely proud of, but that required a completely new set of skills. It didn't require the traditional research skills, but again, if you look at a third of half of those people are people who are retrained CMI people from the erstwhile era, and the other half were brought in from outside, and that actually made a big difference. And the last component is, you got to provide some systematic training, because it is easy to tell people, go inspire, go provoke. But then the question they have is, what do you mean by that? So therefore, we do have a fair amount of investment that we make on people through training programs. If you don't make the training programs engaging enough, we have an internal mascot for the training called Bob. So it's actually a stuffed toy, believe it or not. When somebody, who's in charge of learning in my team said that I have got this Bob, he's going to be the spokesperson for training, I thought it was a bit silly. But 6 months later, I got proven completely wrong, because that mascot is somebody who has traveled to more countries than I have on business. And he's actually driven a phenomenal amount of transformation. And the thing that I keep telling people is that, look, while you're cutting a tree with an axe, pause to sharpen the axe. If you don't sharpen the axe, you'll be very busy cutting the tree with a blunt axe, and nothing will happen. And therefore, investing time in developing yourself. We have put a lot of our people through digital training courses in a big way, because as you saw earlier in the morning, that is the tsunami that is coming and hitting us. People need to be really, really familiar. Mm-hmm. And the last thing is, you can create push, but if you don't create pull, then the function will get decimated. So that is a role of leadership. So therefore, we make sure that we are there in every leadership forum where we are actually not just provoking my peers, but actually the senior most leadership in the company. So they look at you and say, oh my God. The internal mantra is, what is the oh shit moment that you created for your business partner today? Mm-hmm. The more oh shit moments you create, the more you would be asked to come into the meeting, and the more valuable you become. So that's how you create the pull, create the push, and train the people, and then the juggernaut starts rolling.
Great. I see a lot of head nodding going on. So do you have something else that you'd like to add to this?
I was nodding in agreement. Yes, I mean, I think the vision is very important, and I think keeping it simple, because I think our people are as overwhelmed by the changes in the world as our stakeholders. And I think, around the amount of data, the type of skills we expect them to have. And one of the things that we've tried to do is just to simplify it and to really break it down, to say, to your point, Stan, what are the one or two key behaviors we want to see, and we encourage and we reward and we train. What are the one or two new things we want people to learn? And they may not be the same for everybody, but let's not overwhelm. We don't all have to become experts in machine learning overnight, but what can we do to evolve our thinking? And I really loved Will's point earlier about learn, unlearn, and relearn. How can we help our people to do that in a structured, meaningful way without losing sight of the big picture and moving towards that, but without overwhelming them? Because I think one of the risks I see today is people being overwhelmed by the sheer amount of data, the complexity of everything, and trying to make sense of it.
Great, thanks. Hey, Eva, you mentioned something about the 9 capability areas, and I'm wondering if you might want to talk about that, because I feel like, are those specialized areas, or?
Yeah, so they were, for example, there is one we call Humanize, and Sarah Malloy, who is here with us, she's leading that capability. Another one is about communication creation, innovation, then we have business intelligence, then we have media, then we have revenue management. So they are really like capabilities that cut across all the business priorities. What I wanted to build from what Stan was saying about importance of quality of training, it's really super important, because when I travel and each of the capability leader obviously have their own agenda. So they would like their tools and methods to travel the world, and it's interestingly, but unfortunately, the further you are from the center, the further you are from it was created, the communication blurs. So despite of the fact that we have a lot of webinars, despite of the fact that we have like emails and online training, it's completely different versus in-person training. So we don't have a Bob. I love that idea. We might create someone like that. But we really invest in in-personal training on the ground with the markets. And what we found that it's very important that not people from the center, from the headquarters, from the COE coming and present, but the local management presents all the ideas. So when the marketing and insights team are in a different market, see that their leadership is fully on board, they buy into those concepts, and they expect everybody to use those new tools and methods, and they see value in that, that helps a lot. So this is again to the point that we need to push, but we need to have a pull from the senior management. And again, having insights and marketer presenting together and showing how to use and what are the best practices, that's also invaluable. So there is a lot of effort to make sure that everybody buys in, everybody goes through that personally, rather than reading the concepts or listening to that.
Great. I'd love it for each of you to think about like one specific tool or one specific initiative that you feel has made a really big impact in the function along this journey. So if you have one and you're ready to go, let me know.
I can go?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I did talk about it a few minutes back. I think the one thing that I personally feel very proud that this function has created is the people data center. That when we started off, we had a vague idea of what we wanted to do with it. And if I have to be honest with myself, how it looks today and where we started off bear no resemblance to each other. So let me explain what we do in the people data center. Again, it starts off with a clear objective. The clear objective is you can see there is a big trend that is happening. The world of marketing is moving from mass marketing to mass customization to hyper-personalization. So if that is the direction of travel for marketing, different businesses are in different stages in that transformation. What is it that we need to do to power that transformation that is going on? So we then translated into how can we help the business to build 1 billion one-to-one relationship. Seems like a very tall order. Not so tall, given that there are 2.5 billion people who use Unilever products on a daily basis. Yeah? So considering that, 1 billion is actually not a huge target. So we started off with that as an objective. Then we said, okay, we have some incredible assets. I'll start off with something that is really mundane, which is the care lines. We get close to 15 to 20 million calls. And then once I sat and listened to some of the care line calls, and 70% of them were not complaints. 70% of them are people having genuine questions. And then the penny dropping moment happened. I said, shit, this is a reverse market research. Instead of us asking consumers are asking questions, and therein lies the insight. But then we were not harvesting that at all. So we just immediately took a decision to harmonize the platform on a global basis, and now the care lines actually gives us a huge amount of insight. So that's one component. The second component is what we call as PRM. Most companies call it CRM. But then, when we were collecting all this, 15, 20 million personal identifiable information, needless to say, with GDPR compliance and so on, then how do we leverage that to do one-to-one conversation with consumers? So that's when we set up this whole function called PRM, which is also responsible for this 1 billion one-to-one relationship. Then we have what we call a social and business analytics. Social and business analytics is not just social listening. Sentiments, positive, negative, is old school. It is probably 6-7-year-old technology. But then we really powered social and business analytics with one single objective: can I replace traditional research tools? Why do I need to do tracking? To her point that she made earlier, people are giving answers. It's just that, we don't know what, they're giving answers in their own environment. If we can actually mine that, it probably answers 90% of the questions that marketers have. So that's the thing which we went. Now, I can tell you that, the last time I've seen a typical usage and attitude study is probably 3 years ago. And now we have things that happen much more regularly, but at a fraction of a cost. So when you take social business analytics, PRM, and the care lines, put the three together, and that is what is the people data center, and that is powering our one-to-one 1 billion relationship. And guess what? We have 1 billion first-party data that we have created in the last 1.5 years. And that is used to create audiences, that is used to inspire creation of content, that is used to talk to people in a very purposeful and customized way. And that resulted in the organization changing the marketing delivery system from traditional way to what we call as the digital hubs, where people work around the table and dynamically change what needs to be done by leveraging this 1 billion. I think that is something that we probably were a couple of years ahead of the business, but it had to be that way, because you have to create the capability before you can go and tell people that you leverage the capability to do marketing differently. Mm-hmm. That is something that I would most certainly say is transformational within Unilever as a business.
Great,
Yep.
Great, thanks. Ava, how about you?
So I'm going to talk about something which might be quite controversial. So we have decided that all the validation tools we are going to take in-house. So everything which is about copy testing, everything which is about innovation testing, we used to spend a lot of money with vendors who, I'm sure many of you are here, and you probably don't want to hear about it, or you already heard about it.
At least they're getting a heads up.
No, I'm sure there is a lot of heads up already somewhere in the air. I'm sure some of you also wish us fail with that initiative, but we are keeping going that direction fearlessly. So we created a platform called Ada. It is inspired by Ada Lovelace, who was but a great mathematician. She stands behind first computer creation. So we also have a nice story behind that name, which is like a side story. But the whole premise is that these are not really very much value add type of research, and we would like to not only to have them fast, we would like to have them with a very good internal benchmark and a data set, and we would like to know what is in the data set of the benchmark rather than having, black box of all the different categories, blurred into the databases of the agencies. But also what was a problem to solve for us is that in many cases, when there is a research done somewhere, let's say in Singapore, only the Singapore brand manager and the insights manager knew about the results of that research. So now we have this one platform that everything is available to everyone. So we started that year ago. We have started with concept screening. Now we have a data set of 1,000 concepts that we have tested. We can easily see all of them. We can also do some meta-analysis. Hope that we are going to succeed in a journey. It's going to allow us also to do a lot of analysis cross brands or cross problems for one brand. So now we are really at the beginning of the journey, but we all believe that if we keep continuing successfully and that we reach the point that we have this huge data set, we can learn so much more from that, immense amount of data for our brands that will really unlock the growth for us. So I hope we will succeed. I know that it's not the same hope for all of us here, but we'll keep going.
I personally wish you success.
Oh, thank
you. Great.
So one of the things we've done is to declare China as our test and learn place within the insights function, and really be much more intentional to look at China for startups. As you mentioned, to look at China for different data sets. So if you look at the Ali ecosystem, for example, where we can really take something from a person seeing a piece of content right through to their purchase, it gives us very different opportunities and possibilities to really understand path to purchase, for example. So we're much more intentional about the talent we want to have in China and the investment we make into test and learn for our own evolution of data understanding and methodologies.
Wow, very cool.
Can I build on what she said?
Sure.
Yeah.
And then I have another question. So.
Okay. Because when she talked about concept testing, we, over the last couple of years, we have experimented with something very unique. And this was actually, believe it or not, inspired by Tinder.
Oh,
Because,
yeah, talk about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people are, the world of dating and relationship has changed dramatically. And essentially, what are you doing in Tinder? You're doing a concept testing, right? You're swiping left and right. Yeah. So we said, okay, why can't we actually test concepts? So we created a product called Idea Swipe. And that is essentially, it looks and feels exactly like Tinder. You swipe left and right, and it's got a fair amount of behavioral economics algorithm built into it, the time taken and stuff like that. And you can actually use this, and that, it took off so rapidly that we have tested, over 3,000 ideas just in the last 1 year. Mm-hmm. And now we feel very happy about it, and we are actually licensed it out and said anybody in the industry who wants to use it can actually use it.
That's great.
Yeah.
How has concept testing changed for you?
So we're in partnership with Eva, for example, exploring other newer, different ways of doing it. So we're still doing it maybe more the traditional way, but we're certainly exploring, experimenting, and very keen to move forward.
Great. So, Stan dropped 2 S-bombs already, so I'm going to drop one, which is you've done a whole lot of work, on new things and new techniques. So, what's an oh shit insight that you have seen or heard recently? Or with social listening or?
So, one of the things we did, we looked at our content that we're producing, which historically has always started with TV. I think we've gotten a bit better about thinking digital. What we're not very good necessarily is to start with mobile first. Mm-hmm. So when we did an assessment of our content, we realized that most of our content is made for horizontal screens and not very much is made for a vertical screen. So that you know, doesn't sound like much, but when you think about it, I mean, it's a massive, you know, we haven't got the content for the right platform. We need to take a step back. We need to change behavior. We need to educate people. And that was just an important realization because we thought we had been training people on that, but somehow that behavior shift hadn't happened. So we took a step back to say, well, what else do we need to do to help marketeers to really think mobile first, for example?
Great.
So for me, like the last oh shit moment was when we realized that
That's a new technical term, by the way.
we thought that the shopper behavior from the brick and mortar is actually influencing the shopper behavior online, but the other way around, it doesn't happen. So people really differently shop online, but then it stays in that bubble and doesn't influence the regular brick and mortar type of shopping, and we were wrong. So I think once you start shopping online quite a lot, it actually changes the way you shop, you know, your everyday grocery shopping. So that was the aha moment that I didn't expect.
Great.
Yeah, I was hesitating for one reason because I was trying to recollect the name
Just
of
to
this.
make me sweat.
No. Because I was trying to recollect the name of this 92-plus-year-old lady who's actually quite a celebrity. I can't still get that name.
Okay.
But what's that?
Dr. Ruth.
No, the name will come back to me. Maybe you might.
Betty
but we
White.
use her for Magnum as a spokesperson for Magnum ice cream. So you might think that Magnum ice cream, 92-year-old, where is the connection? What's that? I think so.
Somebody can Google that?
Googling it.
Yeah,
exactly.
somebody, if you Google it,
We'll pretend we
But
know what
anyway,
you're
we'll
talking
pretend.
about.
I think one of the big insights that we had, if you go and ask people, the mental model is that ice cream consumed by young people, kids, and so on and so forth. But what we were really understanding through social analytics, that there's a lot of old people who consume incredibly high quantities of ice cream. Yeah. So that to me, was a little bit of a, we all know that, we cut off most research at the age of 55. As if, people who are beyond 55 don't consume any product. So whether it is brand image or, usage and attitudes, we cut off at 55. Why? Actually,
Do you have any insights behind it? Why?
No, the insight is it has been so for many years. And today, the 55 plus probably have more money than the generation that are following. So, that's a huge opportunity. So that's why, we started understanding them a little bit more. And that's what resulted in actually a big aha insight saying that, okay, listen, maybe, being counter trend actually could be a really big idea. And that ad, it's essentially digital advertising, and it has done exceptionally well. It's very early days, but the pace at which it has picked up is phenomenal. The other thing that we have done in terms of an aha insight is we strongly believe in three things. Brands with purpose thrive, people with purpose grow. Sorry, brands with purpose grow, people with purpose thrive, and companies with purpose last. So that's so therefore the common word across all these things is purpose. If you really have to drive purpose behind marketing, you need to understand what is the tension that keeps people awake at night. No consumer can articulate tensions in a research environment. And therefore, really being in a place where they experience their tension is going to be mission critical. And there again, social analytics actually plays a pretty significant role. And when you talk about tensions usually play in fairly sensitive areas. Now, and inserting the brand into the tension is one that actually creates long-term sustainable brand growth. And I can go on and on about multiple brands, the Brook Bond tea example in India, or Ben & Jerry here in the US. There are many brands that have actually inserted themselves into a tension to resolve the tension and create a role for the brand within that context. And that, identifying those things through traditional research would have taken years, but now it takes much less time.
Great. Later on, you and I are going to talk about consumers who can articulate tensions,
Okay.
just FYI. Okay, so last question
From me, before I open it up to the audience, is just what is coming down the pike that you think will really impact this, insights function and the journey? It could be something positive that you think will impact, or it could be something that might be a negative or a challenge. Do you want to, you're ready to go?
Sure.
Great.
So again, if we are very successful in making things automated, if we are very successful to train marketeers, having empathy muscles and understand consumers, if we are successful in making sure that everybody takes the outside world in the company and drives all the decisions, then we are redundant, right, as a function. So that is a provocative thought, right? So we would love that to happen. So if that happens, what it means for us.
Then what? Yeah.
Right. So this is the very interesting journey, because everything we are driving, we are making sure that the importance of our function is going to be lower and lower, and then. Like Stan was saying at the beginning, the boundaries between insights and marketing are not existing anymore, right? So there is much more transfers, there is much more skill sets and leadership skills that we need to have to find the journey in the organization. So maybe there is no consumer insights function going forward. I still believe that it's going to take some time, so it's probably not in 5 years' time, maybe in 10 or 20, and the machine learnings, if they start learning how to act with irrational people, that will be another reason why we will stop existing. So my ask to everybody in the Insights organization is really to focus on what delivers the most value. So even today, try to shift the energy from the things which are, can be easily outsourced or easily automatized to the things that create the most value. And I believe that, the Insights people are the ones who are very curious, and we had the whole discussion about the curiosity here, and we need to be also inspiring and courageous much more than we are today. So those two things will keep us alive and keep us relevant in the organization.
Great. Laurence?
So I think agreeing with Eva, I think democratization, glad I got that word out, of data is one of the biggest drivers of change. And I think, if I look back maybe even 5 years ago, I think we as an insights function were quite protective of data, and we took a lot of pride in that to be, choose the right data, make sure the quality of the data was right, interpret the data. And we've seen a really, really big step change in letting go of that, and even to how you describe it, Eva, I think pushing it onto our business partners to say, hey, here is data, use it yourself. We give you access, direct access to data, to dashboards, to consumers. Talk to consumers, right? We can set up panels. We can connect you with these people. You don't have to talk to us. And I think that has been very liberating. Together with automation, I think it frees up a lot of time to do other things. And where we are really putting the energy is into foresight. And I think into foresight way beyond, again, what we would have thought of in the past. In the past, foresight was a lot about understanding the future of how people shop, how people consume. And I think we're now much more thinking about the future of how people live and the future of how the world evolves, right? What are the big fundamental questions around sustainability, around health, as much as people's lives, that will really impact organizations and are important to consider for organizations to be relevant. So one example, we're looking at what is the impact of self-driving cars. Has a lot of impact on how people eat, how people spend time. Today people need convenience when they eat while driving. Right. Well, maybe that won't be the case anymore. So what is the impact of all of these things?
You should see what I eat while I'm driving. You'd be amazed. Continue.
Tesla.
But it's thinking about foresight much more holistically and helping our organization to remain relevant and a step ahead in an ever-changing world. So I think we are really redefining the role that insights plays in an organization.
Great.
What about you? What do you see kind of happening in the future?
What do I
that
see
impacts-
happening? I think, personal point of view, you could violently disagree, but you might like this one, given where you're coming from. I think data commoditized, dead and gone. Insights democratized. Is not a competitive edge for us as a function. Idea is going to be the new currency. Idea is going to be the new currency. And therefore, if we really have to evolve the function to be deliverers of ideas, whether it is growth ideas, whatever it is, ideas should be the deliverables. If you have to do that, then you need to think about how you do what you do currently very differently. And that's where the whole notion of augmented intelligence comes in. Yeah? That's a new definition of AI, I would say. And the formula for augmented intelligence is very simple. It is human intelligence plus artificial intelligence is equal to augmented intelligence. Now, very often people sit and look at artificial intelligence as something that is going to be an existential threat to the insights people. If we start believing that, it will be an existential threat. But if you decide to spin it around a little bit differently and turn around and say that, how can I harness? That was a quote from Satya Nadella from Microsoft that was shown earlier in the day. If you spin it a little bit differently and say that, okay, listen, how am I going to use artificial intelligence to augment the creativity and curiosity that I have so that I can come up with better ideas, and I create time and space to do that because ideas is the new currency.
Great. Wonderful.
That's the direction of travel.
I did not pay him to say that last thing, but thank you so much. I just want to thank all of the panelists, and then I'll open it up to questions. You guys were great. Really great. Okay, so questions.
There is a question over there.
I can't see.
I see.
And where are the microphone folks? How about right over here in the front
Sorry.
first, and then where did you see somebody?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
hi.
there's a guy over there. Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me? So I'm Vanessa. I'm leading insights at Sanofi. And thank you very much, first off, super, super inspiring. I think in terms of leading the change, there's obviously different environments, right? So there's different people environments. I lead global teams, so based in Europe as well, where the labor laws are very different as well. So people have more longer term careers as well with companies. There's obviously different tolerance to fear, right, in different individuals. So you've talked about courage. So as you think of the leadership traits, or I guess the question is twofold, is how to really inspire courage via soft skills as a leader? What would be the key to do that? And what would be the key leadership trait of the future that you'd say either in yourselves or in the leaders that you look for in terms of soft skill that would be the most important to lead the team into the future?
Who would like to field that?
I can go.
Go ahead.
I think in your question, you actually answered your question. The key thing is courage. Yeah, I'm relatively new in Unilever as an employee because I'm not even 6 years old, and this is a company where people have spent 20 and 25 years, and that's a norm. So if you have to drive change in that kind of an environment, you got to be bold, big, and different. Yeah, and you have to walk in with I've got nothing to lose, everything to gain kind of a mindset. Of course, you need to create allies as we go along. You don't want to go there and stick your neck out all by yourself only to realize that it has been chopped off. So you got to create a few allies as we go along. But I think the most important trait that one needs to have is courage and conviction to bring about a change. It takes time. So therefore, the next trait is patience. You got to be at it. Every day in the morning. And change doesn't happen by uttering a vision once or articulating the direction of travel once. You got to do it again and again and again. The couple of my colleagues here in the room, I'm sure they must be sick and tired of me saying the same thing so many times. But then you got to do that. Otherwise, repetition is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because then it gets embedded. And there's a lot to be learned from how religions get spread. And the key word is evangelism. How do you actually evangelize a philosophy in a way in which you can create a bunch of followers? So That's the way I would think about it. Yeah.
So I would say that from experience, the first thing you need to build is trust, right? So once you have trust, people trust what you are saying, and they trust you because you know your data very well, you know the answer. So once you are trusted, then you have a permission to challenge them. But especially when you come, to the new organization, new teams, new environment, build a trust, and then don't bore them with details, right? Because also as an insights function, we have the tendency to share all those, amazing analysis we have done and amazing stories behind the data. No, now I think there is an era of managing through sound bites. So you have a sound bite, you have like 20 seconds, 30 seconds to share your message. And that message not only needs to be inspiring, but also needs to be very actionable. Because nobody has time for here sitting and listening to our stories. No, we would need to be very precise to get into the ears of our stakeholders. So build trust and then be very choiceful of your message in the organization.
Great.
So one of the things that that we found was, and I think it's also being very much having the leadership in the culture of the organization that you operate in. And one of the things that at Mars we found very important is confronting reality. So it was very important for us as an insights function to take a really close look at what we were doing well, but also what we were not doing so well, and being very honest and vulnerable about that. And then also, of course, confronting reality with our business partners, right? To be very clear to say, well, you tell us when we do a stakeholder interview, you tell us you want this from us, but then you ask something very different. There's a disconnect. So being very, very honest and confronting reality with ourselves and others has been a big starting point before we could then go forward and say, we're on that journey to transformation.
Awesome. Great, thank you. And there was a question up here.
Just when you consider the CPG category more broadly, a significant proportion of the growth that enters the category comes from smaller players or startups. I'm curious to know just what role you feel the insights function plays to help your businesses see that same kind of growth internally? Or do you even think the insights role has a role to play in that, or should it primarily be innovation through acquisition?
I can get that. So it's interesting because probably each of our big companies and big corporations has parts and pockets which are acting differently than a mainstream brand. So we not only manage huge Pepsi, Lay's, Doritos brands, but also have teams who are working in a completely different, with a completely different processes, with a completely different objectives. So e-commerce team doesn't follow exactly the same processes as Lay's brand manager does. We have a group which we call Hive that they are tasked with very fast turnaround and very fast innovation. So I personally believe in both. It's great to have spaces in the organization that you are free to experiment, and you can experiment on the small brands, you can actually experiment ideas that you can then transfer to the big brands. You can have the platform like e-commerce that you can really very fast have answers from the team, but at the same time you need to serve both. You need to have a light touch and make sure that there is some reality check in those fast moving innovative centers. At the same time, you need to make sure that your core brands also change and don't go through the slow and risk management type of research. Because I believe that historically we as a function were managing risk much more than showing the opportunity. So it's all now transferring to accelerating the growth. I don't know if I answer your question.
Great.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we would also, put insights resources on both the established businesses as well as internal insurgents or acquisitions that we make when we bring insurgents in. And I think what's important is it's not one size fits all. So I very much agree with Eva. And one of the things I often hear is that people say, well, these startups, they don't have insights. They don't have an insight, or they don't have data. And I always push back and say they do. They just have a different type of data and different types of insights. They often ask their friends. They ask themselves. Right? They are their consumers, and they have a conviction of how to do things. They don't buy expensive data sets and run loads of analytics, but that doesn't mean that they don't have data and they don't have insights. And how can we be agile enough to do both? To look at the big data, the robust data, where the risk is big, or the opportunity that we want to manage is huge, and where can we be more entrepreneurial in how we generate insights by Googling stuff, for example, right? And how do we apply the right approach to the...
I have a question. My name is Autumn McDonald, and I've been in the insights field since the mid-90s. So I'm loving the conversation about the evolution. And you mentioned the right approach. So as we think about the inflection point that the field is at right now, and more tools are being handed off to business partners, right, to look at the data themselves, how do you ensure that the business partners are equipped with the skill set and the expertise to effectively analyze the data appropriately or to field research appropriately? And I ask that question because I've seen a lot over the past 12 months that is highly problematic. And as a researcher, kind of makes me cringe a little bit, because I know that flawed work coming back is a reflection then upon the field.
Right.
So how do you address that?
Laurence, I feel like you could probably start with that, because you just mentioned something about...
Yeah, I think it's... well, I think it's there's a couple of elements here. I would say, again, it depends on the size of the risk or the size of the opportunity. And I think risk management is something that we do very well. I think today, I agree with Eva, we've done too much of it, or the balance hasn't been right, but there's always going to be a certain level of risk that probably needs to be managed by the experts. But when it comes to small risks, or when it comes to just exploring things, I don't actually see a big risk, right? Today, somebody might come to us and say, well, what do you think about cucumber flavored gum? And then my team goes off and explores that. Well, what's the risk of saying, here are 1,000 people in the top 5 countries, ask them, right? I think it really is a choice around what do we enable people to do, and then how do we educate them? And then how do, once they're educated and trained within a manageable risk, I think we have to accept that they will do their own thing, they will make some mistakes. But that, for me, has been my personal journey around democratization of data, right? To let go and to say, what's the worst that can happen versus what's the great thing that can come of it if they talk to people. Wouldn't that be great? So I think, it's letting go and letting go, of course, within a risk framework.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you learn the most that when you fail.
Yeah.
So you learn from your failures. And this is part of being courageous, right? So I would be happy if people use our tools and make mistakes, and they realize that they make mistakes, rather than not realizing that or not using the tools. Mm-hmm. So I think it's actually a great thing that they are keeping trying.
My dream, and it is nowhere near realization, but my dream would be that companies would have courage to create hall of shame within their companies, where failures are actually talked about publicly and people are proud enough to talk about that. I think we are far away from that, but the day that happens, then you know that you've got the right culture. Yeah. And there are some companies who do that quite well, but they're usually quite small in nature, and that's why they're also agile and nimble, and they learn from failures quickly.
Agree, because there is quite a lot of effort to turn failures into success, right? From a different perspective, we actually did that and that. So yeah, let's create a fame of.
Great.
Fame.
So I think we are up. We're up. So thank you.
There's a hand that went up. You want to answer?
Dan, am I
Yeah,
allowed
you've got
to
a
do
mic
one
in his
more?
hand too.
One more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mark DeMiro, Horizon Group, question for you guys. A lot of focus here on short-term results. You know, the industry is focused on this quarter, et cetera. We've seen some private equity companies get some advantage by taking a 5-year horizon. Obviously, countries like China can take a 100-year horizon. Something's wrong. I mean, I feel like as we begin to think in terms of this moment, this quarter, making everything faster, are we improving our long-term competitive position? So, for example, to use one of your examples, the cucumber gum, Lauren, when will the cucumber gum be popular as opposed to why it's not? And where might it be profitable? Where? So I guess the question is, are we asking the right questions as an industry? And how can we begin asking different questions?
Yeah,
Someone wanna
I think that
quickly take that one?
That's a great question, and I think it goes back to the shift we need to make as an insights industry is to let go of some of those much more short-term, maybe incremental type of questions. You know, I mean, cucumber gum, I don't believe will change the world, right? It might be a nice flavor rotation, and we need to let somebody else have that conversation with consumers, with people, make that decision. And I think we need to start focusing on the big things that are, 10, 20 years out. And I believe where we will really add value is if we answer the questions we're not even being asked today, right? Our stakeholders, our business partners don't even know that they should be asking about self-driving cars. And maybe that's even an example that's too close in because maybe my mind isn't open enough to the possibilities of 20 years ahead. But I think that is where we will really add significant value going forward.